Simplifying a ratio of polynomials, problem type 3. Example 1, simplify. 5v squared minus 13v plus 6, all divided by 5v squared minus 7v minus 6. So the first thing I want you to notice about this example is that both of the quadratics on the top and on the bottom have leading coefficients greater than 1. And so I'm going to be utilizing what's called the AC method, and I've created a video on this topic, factoring a quadratic by the AC method. So I want to encourage you to watch that video if you haven't watched it already. And that's how I'm going to be doing this factoring, because I'm not going to have the space to show every single component of the AC method. And so to save space and to save time, I would go back and watch that video so that you understand how the AC method really works. And so the first step to simplify is we want to factor the numerator, so that top. We're going to multiply the A and the C terms. So the A is 5 and the C is 6. So I'm going to multiply those. 5 times 6 gives me 30. And the numerator was 5v squared minus 13v plus 6. So what I'm really doing here is I'm looking for two factors of 30 that multiply to give me 30, but add to give me that middle term, that negative 13v. And so those two factors will be a negative 3 and a negative 10. Negative 3 times negative 10 does give me positive 30. Negative 3 plus negative 10 gives me that negative 13, that middle term. And so I'm going to break apart negative 13v. And so I'll have 5v squared minus 3v minus 10v plus 6. And so now I'm going to do factor by grouping. I really like that way of factoring, and I'm very consistent with that when I do a lot of these factoring problems. And so I'm going to group the first two terms together, 5v squared minus 3v, and I'm going to find the GCF of those two terms. The GCF will be a v. So I'm going to factor out a v, so I'll have v parentheses 5v minus 3, and then I bring down those last two terms, minus 10v plus 6. Now I'm going to factor the last two terms together. I have a 10v plus 6, and so the GCF is going to be a 2. I'm going to factor out that 2, and I'll have v parentheses 5v minus 3, and then I factored out that GCF of 2, and then inside the parentheses I'll have negative 5v plus 3. At this stage, when you do factor by grouping, the two binomials or the two parentheses need to match, and they do not match exactly. They are just opposite signs, and so to fix that, instead of bringing out the GCF of a 2, I'm going to bring out the GCF of a negative 2. So I'm going to bring out a negative 2 instead of a positive 2. And what that does is that changes the sign of everything on the inside of the parentheses of that second binomial. And so now the two binomials match, the two parentheses match. I have 5v minus 3. So that's going to be one of my factors. And then to get the second factor, it's going to be the two terms that are in front of the parentheses, so the v minus 2. So the numerator will factor to be 5v minus 3 times v minus 2. Now I'm ready to factor the denominator. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to multiply the a and the c terms. So the a is 5 and the c is negative 6. 5 times negative 6 gives me negative 30. So the denominator was 5v squared minus 7v minus 6. And so I'm looking for two factors of negative 30 that multiply to give me negative 30, but then add to give me that middle term of that negative 7. And so that's going to be 3 and negative 10. 3 times negative 10 gives me negative 30. 3 plus negative 10 gives me negative 7. And so I'm going to break apart that middle term, that negative 7v. So I'll have 5v squared plus 3v minus 10v minus 6. Now I'm going to do factor by grouping. I'm going to group those first two terms together, 5v squared plus 3v. I'm going to factor out the GCF. I'm going to find the GCF, which is going to be a v. So I'm going to factor out the v, and so I'll have v parentheses 5v plus 3, and then I bring down those last two terms, the minus 10v and the minus 6. Now I'm going to find the GCF between those last two terms. Since they are both negative, the GCF will be a negative 2. So I'm going to factor out a negative 2 of those last two terms. So I'll have v parentheses 5v plus 3 minus 2, and then inside the parentheses will be a 5v plus 3. At this stage with factor by grouping, your binomials should match, and they do. The two parentheses match. They're both 5v plus 3. So that's going to be one of my factors. And then to get the second factor, it's going to be the terms that are in front of the parentheses, so v minus 2. So the denominator will factor to be 5v plus 3 and then times v minus 2. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace the quadratics with the factors that I got for both the numerator and the denominator. So the numerator was 5v minus 3 times v minus 2, and then the denominator was 5v plus 3 times v minus 2. Now I look at the factors and I'm going to cancel any factors that are the same. I have a v minus 2 on the numerator and a v minus 2 on the denominator. So those are going to cancel out. And so I'm left with 5v minus 3 on top on the numerator and 5v plus 3 on the bottom or the denominator. And so this is going to be my final answer for example 1. This is how it simplifies. 5v minus 3 all over 5v plus 3. Example 2, simplify. 4w squared minus 25 all over 2w squared minus 3w minus 5. I'm going to factor the numerator. I'm going to multiply the a and the c terms. The a is 4 and the c is negative 25. So 4 times negative 25 gives me negative 100. The numerator is 4w squared minus 25, so that means the middle term is 0. It's not there. And so what we need to do is we're trying to find two factors that multiply to give me negative 100 that add to give me 0. So that will be 10 and negative 10. Negative 10 times 10 gives me negative 100. Negative 10 plus 10 gives me 0. Now I did create another video on how to factor a difference of squares in one variable, and so I suggest that you watch that because I show you a trick on how to do that so you don't have to go through and find all the factors of negative 100 because that can be very time consuming. Now I'm going to break apart 0w. So I have 4w squared minus 10w plus 10w minus 25. I'm going to do factor by grouping. I'm going to group those first two terms together, 4w squared minus 10w. I'm going to find the GCF. The GCF is 2w between those two terms. I'm going to factor out the GCF. It's 2w parentheses 2w minus 5 plus 10w minus 25. Next, I'm going to group those last two terms together, 10w minus 25, and I'm going to find the GCF. The GCF is going to be 5. I'm going to factor out that 5 now, so I'll have 2w times 2w minus 5 plus 5 times 2w minus 5. So at this stage in factoring by grouping, the two binomials that we have should match, and they do. They are both 2w minus 5. So that means one of the factors is going to be 2w minus 5. To get the second factor, it's going to be the terms that are in front of the parentheses, so 2w plus 5. So the numerator factors to be 2w minus 5 times 2w plus 5. Now we're ready to factor the denominator, and so we're going to multiply the a and the c terms. So a is equal to 2, c is equal to negative 5. So we're going to do 2 times negative 5 to get negative 10. And so the denominator is 2w squared minus 3w minus 5. So we're looking for two factors that multiply to get me negative 10, but then add to give me that middle term of negative 3. So the two factors will be 2 and negative 5. 2 times negative 5 gives me negative 10. 2 plus negative 5 gives me that negative 3. Now I'm going to break apart that middle term of negative 3w. So I have 2w squared plus 2w minus 5w minus 5. Now I'm going to factor by grouping. I'm going to group those first two terms together, 2w squared plus 2w, and I'm going to find the GCF of those two terms. The GCF will be 2w. Now I'm going to factor out that GCF. So I'll have 2w times w plus 1, and then I bring down those last two terms, minus 5w minus 5. Now I'm going to group those last two terms together, negative 5w minus 5. Since they both are negative, I'm going to bring out that negative with the GCF of 5. So the GCF is going to be negative 5, so that's what I'm going to factor out. So I'll have 2w times w plus 1, and then I brought out that negative 5, and then what will be remaining inside of the parentheses will be w plus 1. And so the two binomials should match, and they do. They both are w plus 1, so that's going to be one of our factors. To get the second factor, it's going to be the terms in front of the parentheses, so 2w minus 5. So we have w plus 1 times 2w minus 5. And so I'm going to take the original problem and I'm going to replace the numerator and the denominator with the factors that I got when I factored each of them. So the numerator will be 2w minus 5 times 2w plus 5. And then the denominator is going to be w plus 1 times 2w minus 5. Now I'm going to look at each of these factors and I'm going to cancel out anything that is on both the top and on the bottom. So I have a 2w minus 5 and a 2w minus 5 on the numerator and the denominator, so those cancel out. And so I'll be left with 2w plus 5 all over w plus 1 as my final answer for example 2.